I need to ask you something that's going to sound insane. Have you ever looked another being in the eyes, something not human, something that shouldn't exist according to everything you were taught, and asked it point blank if it was a demon, if it was one of the fallen, sent to deceive you, to lead you away from God? I have. And the answer I got didn't just shake my faith. It rebuilt it from the ground up in a way that still keeps me awake at night, not from fear, but from wonder. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to do something. I need you to comment below and tell me where you're watching this from. What city, what country, what corner of this strange planet we all share. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a story that connects to something bigger than any of us. And if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about reality, about faith, about what's really out there in the darkness between stars, share it. Subscribe to this channel, because this is just the beginning. We're all trying to make sense of the same mystery, and maybe together we can find the truth hidden in plain sight. Now let me take you back to where it started. September 23rd, 2 years ago, 2:47 in the morning. Interstate 40, westbound through New Mexico, somewhere between Tucumcari and nothing. If you've never driven that stretch at night, you can't understand the kind of darkness I'm talking about. It's not just the absence of light, it's the presence of emptiness, mile after mile of desert and mesa, the highway a gray ribbon cutting through an ocean of black, and you start to feel like you're not driving through geography anymore, but through space itself, suspended between earth and sky with nothing to anchor you to either one. I was hauling refrigerated produce, strawberries and lettuce destined for Phoenix, my 18th run that month. The Kenworth hummed underneath me with that particular diesel rhythm that becomes like a heartbeat after enough hours, steady, reliable, almost comforting. The cabin smelled like the same thing it always smelled like: old coffee, the pine air freshener I replaced every 2 weeks, and that indefinable scent of distance, of miles absorbed into vinyl and metal. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 52 years old. I wasn't always a trucker. 23 years ago, I was in my final year at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. I was going to be a pastor. I was going to save souls, lead congregations, be a light in the darkness, all the things you're supposed to say when you feel called. And I did feel called. At least I thought I did. But something happened in that final year. Not a crisis exactly, more like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it at first, just a subtle loss of pressure. And then one day you realize you're running on empty, and you don't know when it started. I began asking questions my professors couldn't answer. Not wouldn't, couldn't. Questions about suffering. About why a loving God would design a universe where children get cancer, where genocides happen, where good people pray themselves hoarse and die alone anyway. The standard answers stopped satisfying me. Free will. The fall. God's mysterious ways. It all started sounding like excuses, like we were defending a cosmic tyrant, because we were too afraid to admit we didn't understand the trial we were born into. So I left. 3 months before graduation, I walked away. I left my fiancée Sarah, who was planning to be a pastor's wife. I left my study group, my mentors, my future. I got my commercial driver's license and started moving things from one place to another, which felt more honest than trying to move people toward something I no longer believed in. That was 20 years ago. 20 years of highways and truck stops and radio preachers I'd listened to just to feel something, even if that something was anger. 20 years of looking up at stars through a windshield and feeling nothing but absence. The Christian talk station was doing its usual thing that night. 2 theologians debating predestination versus free will like they had for 2,000 years, like they'd ever reach a conclusion. I let it play because silence was worse. Silence made me think, and thinking led to places I'd spent 2 decades trying to avoid. Mile marker 86, 87, 88. The temperature gauge was normal. Oil pressure fine. The Kenworth was running exactly the way it should. That particular purr of an engine that's been maintained properly. That'll give you another 300,000 miles if you treat it right. Mile marker 89. That's when everything stopped. Not gradually. Not a sputter or a cough or any warning. Just cessation. The engine died like someone had reached into the laws of physics and deleted combustion. The dashboard lights went dark. The radio cut to silence mid-sentence. Even the running lights, the clearance lights, the glow from the instrument panel, everything went black simultaneously. I coasted on momentum, my hands gripping the wheel harder than necessary, that spike of adrenaline you get when something fundamentally reliable suddenly isn't. I guided the truck onto the shoulder, or what I thought was the shoulder in the sudden totality of darkness. Gear into neutral. Parking brake. The air brake hissed, and then there was nothing but silence. Complete silence. I've been in quiet places before. Desert nights, mountain roads at 3 a.m., those moments between storms when even the wind holds its breath. But this was different. This was the silence of absence, like someone had scooped out all the sound from the world and left a vacuum. I couldn't hear insects, couldn't hear the tick of cooling metal, couldn't hear my own breathing, even though I could feel my chest moving. Then I felt the cold. It came from nowhere, from everywhere. The temperature inside the cab had been a comfortable 70 degrees. Now I could see my breath condensing in front of my face, white clouds forming and dissipating. I grabbed for my phone on the mount. Dead. Completely dead. And it had been at 73% charge. That's when my heart started really pounding. Because electronics fail. Engines die. These things happen. But not like this. Not all at once. Not with this feeling in the air, this pressure against my eardrums like I was descending in an airplane too fast. I should tell you about the light now, but I need you to understand something first. I'm not someone who sees things. I don't do drugs. I rarely drink. I'm not prone to visions or mystical experiences or whatever you want to call them. I'm the kind of person who needs receipts, evidence, reasons. I left seminary because I needed answers I couldn't find, not because I was satisfied with mystery. So when I tell you what I saw, understand that I've spent 2 years trying to explain it away, tried to convince myself it was an electrical storm, ball lightning, some military test, a stroke, a psychotic break, anything that would let me file it under understood and move on with my life. But I can't, because I know what I saw. The light appeared approximately half a mile ahead, maybe 3 miles past mile marker 89. It wasn't on the horizon. It was vertical, a column of luminescence descending from the sky to the ground like a pillar, like something from Exodus, except it wasn't fire and it wasn't cloud. It was silver blue, the color of moonlight through deep water, and it didn't flicker or waver. It was absolutely still. And that stillness was somehow more terrifying than if it had been moving. I sat in the cab watching it for what might have been 30 seconds or 10 minutes. Time had gone strange, elastic, unreliable. The column of light just stood there in the middle of the empty highway, impossibly bright but not painful to look at, not casting shadows the way light should, just existing in violation of everything that made sense. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stay in the truck, lock the doors, wait for dawn, flag down another vehicle. But no other vehicles were coming. The highway stretched empty in both directions, and I had the sudden, overwhelming certainty that no one was going to come, that this moment had been arranged, orchestrated, that I was meant to be here at exactly this time, in exactly this place. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Not even a click. Tried my phone again. pressing buttons that wouldn't illuminate. The cold was getting worse, seeping into my bones, my breath coming in thicker clouds. I don't know if it was curiosity or compulsion or something else, but I found myself opening the door. The cold outside was even more intense, shocking, like stepping into a freezer. The air tasted wrong, metallic, sharp, like ozone after lightning. But more so, my boots hit the asphalt and I stood there beside my dead truck on the empty highway, looking at the column of light half a mile ahead. I started walking toward it. Every step felt like a decision I was making, and also like a decision being made for me. Like I was moving along rails that had been laid down long before I was born. The only sound was my footsteps and my breathing, loud in the impossible silence. The stars overhead were brighter than I'd ever seen them, sharp and cold and infinite, and I had the strangest thought: they're watching. As I got closer, details emerged that shouldn't have been possible. The light wasn't uniform. There were structures within it, geometries that hurt to look at directly, patterns that seemed to fold into dimensions my eyes couldn't properly process. And at the base of the column, resting on the highway like it weighed nothing at all, was the craft. I'm going to use that word craft because I don't have a better one. It wasn't a saucer. It wasn't cigar-shaped. It was geometry made solid, a form that seemed simultaneously simple and infinitely complex. The surface looked like it was made of liquid mercury that had somehow been frozen mid-flow, reflecting the starlight and the column of light, and also something else. Something from inside itself. It was maybe 40 feet across, maybe 20 feet tall, or maybe those dimensions were wrong because it seemed to shift slightly when I tried to focus on it, like it existed partially in my vision and partially in my perception. I stopped about 30 feet away. My whole body was shaking from cold, from fear, from the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. And through the shaking, through the terror, there was something else. A feeling I hadn't felt in 20 years. A sense that I was standing at the edge of an answer I'd stopped believing existed. The light around the craft pulsed once, a slow, breathing rhythm, and a doorway appeared. Not opened. Appeared. Like the wall of the craft remembered it was supposed to have an entrance, and obliged. The opening was perfect darkness. A rectangle of absolute black against the luminous surface, and it was an invitation and a warning and a threshold. I knew I could never uncross once I stepped through it. I stood there at the edge of the light, at the edge of everything I thought I knew, and I made a choice that changed my life forever. I stepped forward into the dark. The darkness inside the doorway lasted exactly 3 steps. Then it wasn't dark anymore, and I wasn't sure I was inside anything that could be properly called a craft, because the space around me defied every rule I understood about how containers and contained things work. The interior was vast. Not large vast. The kind of space that shouldn't fit inside a 40-foot object sitting on a highway. I've heard about those optical illusions where rooms look bigger than they are because of mirrors and angles. But this wasn't illusion. This was impossibility made casual, like whatever intelligence designed this thing had looked at physics and decided it was more of a suggestion than a law. The light came from everywhere and nowhere. Not harsh, not soft, just present. A warm, amber glow that didn't cast shadows, that seemed to emanate from the air itself or from the walls, which weren't quite walls but rather boundaries, that suggested themselves without being solid. The temperature was perfect, so neutral I couldn't feel it at all, like my body had forgotten what sensation meant. And the air, I can't describe the air except to say it tasted clean in a way that made me realize Earth's air always tastes like something, like distance and dust and the exhalations of 8 billion people. And this didn't taste like any of that. The floor beneath my boots was solid but gave slightly, not like walking on carpet, but like walking on something that was responding to my presence, accommodating my weight without effort. The surface had a faint pattern, like circuit boards or neural pathways or both. Lines of lighter luminescence running in fractals that disappeared when I tried to follow them with my eyes. I took another step forward, then another. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Behind me, the doorway remained open. I could see the highway through it, the column of light, my truck small and abandoned in the distance. An exit if I needed one. But somehow I knew that wasn't how this worked. I'd crossed a threshold that was more than physical. Hello? My voice came out smaller than I intended, swallowed by the strange acoustics of the space. It didn't echo. It just stopped, like the walls absorbed sound the way they absorbed shadow. No response. Just that ambient light and the sense of presence, of something massive and aware watching me with attention that felt almost physical. I walked deeper into the space. There were no corridors, no rooms. Just this single chamber that seemed to subtly reconfigure itself as I moved, always maintaining the same relationship to me. Vast but not infinite, enclosed but not claustrophobic. And then, maybe 30 feet from the entrance, I saw something that made me stop. A surface. A panel. A wall. It rose from the floor or grew from it, a vertical expanse of that same liquid mercury material, but darker, more reflective. I could see myself in it. Marcus Webb, 52 years old, overweight, graying, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days, looking small and absurd in this place that had no business existing. And then my reflection moved when I didn't. My stomach dropped. The figure in the surface shifted, turned, and I realized it wasn't my reflection at all. It was him, the being. Stepping out from the wall or through it or materializing from it, I couldn't tell which because my brain couldn't process the transition properly. He stood maybe 7 feet tall, not grotesquely tall, but noticeably beyond human proportion, with a build that was slender but suggested strength, the way a steel cable suggests strength, economy of form that contains immense force. The skin, if it was skin, had a faint luminescence to it, pale like alabaster or moonstone but warmer, organic. The face was humanoid. 2 eyes, nose, mouth, but the proportions were wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Eyes slightly too large, set slightly too far apart. The nose more delicate, the mouth wider, expressive in subtle ways. But it was the eyes that held me frozen. They were dark but not black. Deep blue or purple, the color of the ocean in places where the continental shelf drops away into nothing. And they had depth, not just physical depth, but dimensional depth. Like I was looking into something vast that happened to be contained in eye sockets. Like there was more space inside those eyes than in the entire chamber around us. He didn't speak immediately, just looked at me with what I desperately wanted to interpret as curiosity or interest or something other than the predatory evaluation I feared. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. Every human instinct was screaming at me that I was in the presence of something apex, something that existed so far up the chain of being that I was less than an insect by comparison. Then he tilted his head slightly, a gesture so human it was jarring, and I felt understood. Marcus Webb. Not words, not sound. It was meaning delivered directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely, and with the meaning came knowledge of how to parse it, how to interpret it, like a language downloaded in an instant. His mouth hadn't moved. The air hadn't vibrated. But I heard him more clearly than I'd ever heard anything. "How do you know my name?" It came out as a whisper. "We know all your names." Another download of meaning. We've been watching for a very long time. The pronoun shift hit me, we, not I. There were more of them. Of course there were. And they'd been watching. Watching what? Humanity. Me specifically. Both. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question sounded childish the moment it left my mouth, but it was the only thing I could think to ask, the only thing that mattered in that moment. The being's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something gentler than the neutral observation he'd been showing. "No, Marcus, you're not in danger. You are never in danger." "Then what is this? What do you want?" He moved closer, not walking exactly, but gliding, his feet making no sound against that responsive floor. He stopped maybe 10 feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, and the movement felt like submission, like bowing without intending to. "We want to show you something, to share something that you've been searching for without knowing where to look." My throat was dry. "I haven't been searching for anything. Haven't you?" The meaning came with weight, with layers. 20 years of highways, 20 years of running from questions you convinced yourself had no answers. You've been searching, Marcus. You're still searching. That's why you're here. The casual invasion of my privacy, my history, should have terrified me more than it did, but instead I felt something crack open in my chest, something old and calcified starting to break apart. "You don't know anything about me. We know you left Fuller Theological Seminary 3 months before graduation. We know you asked questions about suffering and divine intention that your professors couldn't answer. We know you loved a woman named Sarah, who forgave you for leaving but never understood why you had to. We know you listen to Christian radio, not because you believe anymore, but because you're hoping someone will say something that makes you believe again." Each statement landed like a physical blow. Accurate. Invasive. Impossible. I took a step backward and my legs hit something, a surface that hadn't been there before, something to sit on that had materialized or grown from the floor. I sat because standing was becoming difficult. "How?" The word barely made it out. "Because we've been watching your species for a very long time. Longer than your civilizations. Longer than your religions. We've seen you build and destroy, create and corrupt, reach for transcendence and settle for survival. And some of us—" He paused, and I got the sense of something being carefully translated, carefully chosen. "Some of us were told to watch for specific individuals, people who keep asking, even after the world teaches them to stop." I was shaking again, but not from cold. From something deeper, something fundamental. "Told by who?" He tilted his head again, and this time there was definitely something like amusement in those infinite eyes. "You're going to ask me directly, aren't you?" "Ask you what?" "The question you've been carrying since you were 17 years old, since that youth group retreat where you saw something in the woods you couldn't explain, the question that made you go to seminary in the first place, the question that drove you away when no one could answer it properly." My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Because he was right. There had been something in the woods at that retreat, a light through the trees that moved with intention, that watched me watching it. I'd convinced myself it was nothing, then that it was angels, then that I'd imagined it. But I'd never forgotten. "Are you a demon?" I said it, out loud. The question that had been burning in my chest since the moment I'd seen the craft, since the moment I'd stepped inside, maybe since the moment I was born. The question that every Christian kid thinks about when they read about lying spirits and wolves in sheep's clothing and Satan appearing as an angel of light. Are you one of the fallen? Is this a deception? Are you here to lead me away from God? The words hung in that perfect air between us. The being didn't react immediately. Those deep eyes held mine, and I felt like I was being read, parsed, understood on levels I couldn't comprehend. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10, 15, long enough that I started to believe I'd offended him, or worse, confirmed something he'd been hoping I wouldn't figure out. Then he moved. Not toward me, but toward the reflective surface he'd emerged from. He placed one long-fingered hand against it, and the entire wall came alive. "Come here, Marcus." It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. But I felt compelled anyway, standing on legs that didn't feel entirely mine, walking those 10 feet to stand beside him. Close enough now to see that his skin had texture like river stones, worn smooth, that his fingers had one too many joints, that he radiated a warmth that was comforting and alien all at once. "I'm going to answer your question," he said, and the meaning came with weight like a door opening onto something vast. "But the answer isn't simple. It's going to require you to see things you've been protected from seeing, things your species isn't usually ready to understand. Are you willing?" Was I willing? I thought about my truck on the empty highway. I thought about 20 years of running from questions. I thought about Sarah's face the day I told her I was leaving, the way her faith stayed intact while mine crumbled. I thought about all the nights I'd looked up at stars and felt nothing but absence, nothing but cold. "Yes," I said, "show me." The being nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement or respect, or both. His hand pressed slightly deeper into the surface, and the wall began to shimmer, the mercury liquid appearance rippling like water disturbed by wind. Images formed. No, not images. Windows. Portals into places and times that existed somewhere outside this craft, outside this moment. I saw skies that weren't Earth's sky. Stars in configurations I didn't recognize. I saw beings like him and not like him. Different forms, different luminescences, moving through spaces that bent wrong. I saw Earth, but ancient, pristine, before cities, before agriculture, before we'd learned to make fire, and I saw them there. His kind, watching us, walking among us, appearing in forms we could almost comprehend, speaking in languages we were just learning to build. "We are not what your scriptures call demons," he said quietly, his meaning resonant and sad and old beyond measure. "But we are in your scriptures. We've always been in your scriptures." The shimmer showed me more. Desert nights, figures of light appearing to shepherds, to prophets, to wanderers, wheels within wheels that were craft like this one, technology so advanced it looked like divinity to eyes that had no context for it. Stars that moved with purpose, guiding travelers who thought they followed divine signs. "Your ancestors had no words for what we were," he continued, and I couldn't look away from the visions cascading across the wall. So they used the words they had. Angels, messengers, watchers, Elohim. They weren't wrong, Marcus. But they weren't entirely right either. I felt tears on my face without realizing I'd started crying. "Then what are you?" He turned to look at me, and those eyes held something I finally recognized. Not superiority, not detachment, but something almost like kinship, almost like compassion. "We're the ones who were here first. We're the ones who were told to watch. And we're the ones who have to decide, now that your species is reaching the edge of everything, whether to intervene or let you fall." The wall went still, the images fading, leaving just our reflections. Me small and human and weeping, him tall and luminous and unbearably old. "Your question was, am I a demon?" he said softly. "And my answer begins here. Not all angels stayed in heaven, Marcus, but not all who fell became demons. Some of us are still trying to figure out which side of that line we belong on." He lifted his hand from the wall and turned to face me fully. "Let me show you what demons actually are. And then you can decide for yourself what you're standing in front of." The wall shifted again, but this time the images that formed were darker. Not in color, but in weight, in the feeling they carried, like looking at photographs of crime scenes or war zones. Documentation of something that shouldn't be but is. "You want to know about demons," the being said, and his voice carried a heaviness I hadn't heard before. "Your species has gotten some things right and many things wrong. Sit, Marcus. This will take time." The surface I'd sat on before materialized again, closer now, and I sank onto it gratefully because my legs were shaking. He remained standing, his hand resting against the wall, conducting the visions like a maestro conducting an orchestra of terrible truth. In the beginning, your beginning, not the beginning of everything, there were watchers. That's what we were called, are called. Our purpose was observation, documentation, subtle guidance when permitted. We watched your species emerge from the same evolutionary processes that shaped every other conscious race in this galaxy and the thousands of others. You weren't special at first. You were just another species, learning to stand upright, learning to use tools, learning to ask why. The wall showed me Earth through time-lapse, continents shifting, ice advancing and retreating, and through it all, figures like him appearing and disappearing at key moments. Not often, not constantly, but there, at thresholds. But something happened with your species that we hadn't seen before. You developed something we didn't expect. Not intelligence. Intelligence is common. We've cataloged thousands of intelligent species. You developed meta-consciousness. The ability to ask, not just, what am I, but what should I be? The capacity for moral reasoning that transcended survival instinct. The ability to choose suffering for abstract principles. To love beyond reproductive advantage. To create meaning where none existed. He turned to look at me, and those infinite eyes held something like wonder. You became capable of faith. Not belief. Belief is just accepting what seems true. Faith is hoping for what can't be proven. Building your lives around invisible architecture. Your species looked at a universe that gives no evidence of caring about you, and you decided to care anyway. You looked at the silence of the cosmos and heard an invitation. That, he paused, searching for the right meaning. That was unprecedented. That changed everything. The images shifted to show gatherings of beings like him, hundreds of them in spaces that weren't quite physical, engaged in what looked like intense debate or discussion, watching projections of humanity, of our wars and art and prayers and atrocities. We were divided. Some of us believe you should be left alone, that intervention would corrupt the very thing that made you unique. Others believed you needed guidance, acceleration, help reaching your potential before you destroyed yourselves. And others, his expression darkened, others saw opportunity. The wall showed me something that made my stomach turn. Beings like him but different, their luminescence corrupted somehow, darkened, feeding on something emanating from humans in the visions. Fear, pain, despair. Like smoke rising from people in anguish, and these corrupted beings drawing it in, sustaining themselves on it. This is where your understanding of demons begins to approach accuracy, he said quietly. What you call the fall wasn't a war in the way your Milton imagined it. It wasn't about pride or rebellion in the political sense. It was about choice, about what to feed on. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse. Feed on? Conscious beings generate energy, Marcus. Emotional energy, spiritual energy. Your language doesn't have precise words for it. When you feel joy, gratitude, love, wonder, you emanate something. When you feel fear, hatred, despair, anguish, you emanate something different. Both are real. Both are powerful. Both can sustain beings like us who exist partially outside your dimensional framework. He moved away from the wall, pacing in that gliding way, and I could see the struggle in him to translate concepts that probably didn't translate cleanly. Most of us, most watchers, we sustain ourselves on what you might call higher frequencies. The energy of growth, discovery, transcendence. It's cleaner, more difficult to obtain, because it requires you to be truly elevated, but it doesn't harm the source. We can be present at moments of human breakthrough, human love, human courage, and draw sustenance without diminishing you. It's symbiotic. The wall showed me moments I recognized from history, from art people having revelations, religious experiences, moments of profound insight or connection. And yes, there in the background, barely visible, presences like him, witnessing, partaking, helping somehow. But some of us discovered that the lower frequencies, fear, pain, despair, are more potent, more immediately satisfying, easier to generate because your species is so vulnerable to trauma, to manipulation, to the amplification of your darkest instincts. And these frequencies are addictive, Marcus. The more you feed on them, the more you need them. And the more you need them, the more you're willing to do to generate them. The corrupted beings on the wall were shown in more detail now, and I could see the transformation that had occurred. They'd lost the warmth I saw in him, the sense of contained light. They'd become something hungrier, more angular, more predatory. Still beautiful in a terrible way, but beauty that concealed appetite. These are what you call demons, not a separate species, not fallen angels in the sense of beings cast out of a location, but watchers who chose to become parasites instead of observers, who discovered they could whisper to your species, amplify your fears, encourage your worst impulses, and feed on the suffering that resulted. They're not interested in your damnation for ideological reasons. They're interested in your pain because your pain sustains them. I felt sick. The implications were cascading through my mind faster than I could process them. So all the evil in the world, possession, oppression, temptation that's real, that's them? He shook his head slowly. No. And this is crucial, Marcus. This is where your religions often get it wrong in ways that serve the corrupted ones. Most evil in your world is human. Most cruelty, most violence, most destruction. That's all you. You have the capacity for immense darkness entirely on your own. The corrupted ones don't need to possess you to make you hurt each other. They just need to encourage what's already there, amplify it slightly, make the dark choice seem more reasonable, more justified. He gestured, and the wall showed me human history wars, genocides, systematic cruelties, and I could see the shadowy presences at the edges, not causing but feeding, not controlling but encouraging, growing fat on the suffering we inflicted on ourselves. True possession, true direct control. It's rare. It requires a human to be so broken, so emptied out by trauma or desperation or deliberate invitation, that there's space for something else to enter. Most of what your exorcists deal with is human psychological fracture that resembles outside influence because the human mind breaks in predictable patterns. But yes, sometimes, when someone is hollow enough and a corrupted one is hungry enough, true possession occurs. And it's... He paused, and I saw something like pain cross his features. It's an abomination to both parties involved. I thought about exorcism movies, about spinning heads and demonic voices. Is it like the movies? Rarely. It's usually quieter, sadder. A person slowly losing themselves, their choices becoming less their own, their appetites changing, their light diminishing. The theatrical cases, the violent ones, those happen when a corrupted one has been starving and finds a host that resists, that fights back. Most possessions are slow erosions, not sudden invasions, and most are mistaken diagnoses of mental illness, which is its own tragedy. The wall shifted to show me something else, places I recognized as holy sites, temples, churches, mosques, synagogues, and around them presences both light and dark, drawn to the concentration of human spiritual energy. Both sides are drawn to your places of worship, he explained. Those of us who remain uncorrupted come because that's where your species reaches highest, where you generate the most profound frequencies of transcendence and hope. The corrupted ones come because that's also where you're most vulnerable to manipulation, where your certainty can be twisted into cruelty, your righteousness into oppression, your faith into a weapon. They fed magnificently on your religious wars, your inquisitions, your righteous hatred of the other. I thought about the prosperity gospel preachers I'd seen on TV, screaming about demons while fleecing their congregations, about terrorists killing in God's name, about all the ways faith had been corrupted into control. So religion is what? A trap? A feeding ground? No. His answer was immediate and firm. Religion is a tool, like language or fire. It can illuminate or burn. It can connect you to transcendent truth, or it can become a cage of certainty that prevents growth. The corrupted ones don't need to destroy your religions, Marcus. They just need to make them rigid, judgmental, exclusive, cruel. Turn them from paths toward truth into walls that separate you from each other and from the very thing you're seeking. He moved closer to me, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him, that strange comfort his presence brought, despite everything I was learning. I need you to understand something crucial. The corrupted one's demons, if you prefer, they haven't won. They're not stronger than those of us who remain aligned with higher purpose. But they're persistent, and they're patient, and they're very, very good at using your own capacity for self-deception against you. They don't need to drag you to hell, Marcus. They just need to convince you to build it yourselves, one justified cruelty at a time, one righteous judgment at a time, one small surrender of compassion at a time. The wall went dark, leaving just our reflections again. I saw myself, red eyes, tear-streaked face, looking 10 years older than I had 2 hours ago. And him, luminous and patient, waiting for the inevitable question. Why are you telling me this? My voice cracked. Why now? Why me? He was quiet for a long moment, and I got the sense of something being carefully considered, carefully weighed. When he spoke again, the meaning came with layers of implication I couldn't fully parse. Because your species is reaching a threshold, you're developing technologies that could elevate you to the stars or extinguish you completely. Artificial intelligence that could amplify your wisdom or automate your cruelty. Biological engineering that could transcend your limitations or redesign you into something unrecognizable. Nuclear capacity that's growing more sophisticated even as your wisdom for wielding it remains adolescent. You're at the edge, Marcus, and the corrupted ones know it. They're pushing hard right now, feeding on your anxiety about the future, your divisions, your despair. If they can keep you fractured, keep you frightened, keep you feeding on each other, you'll destroy yourselves before you ever reach the potential that made you interesting in the first place. He turned to face me fully, and the weight of his gaze was almost physical. Some of us have been given permission to intervene. Not to save you, we can't do that, the choice has to be yours. But to remind you, to show individuals who still ask questions what's actually at stake, to offer you a clearer picture of the battlefield you're standing on, whether you realize it or not. Permission? From who? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be inadequate, that whatever he said wouldn't fully capture the reality he was trying to convey. From the one you've been asking about since you were 17. The one you stopped believing in when suffering seemed to prove absence. The architect, Marcus. The consciousness that dreamed this universe into being and embedded itself so thoroughly into the fabric of everything that separating creation from creator becomes meaningless. You call it God, though that word carries so much baggage it's almost unusable. My heart was hammering again. God sent you? You're saying God is real, and he sent you to what? Warn me about demons? Not warn. Clarify. He tilted his head. You left seminary because you couldn't reconcile a loving God with a universe full of suffering. You asked how a benevolent creator could design a system where children get cancer, where innocent people suffer, where prayers go unanswered. Do you still want to know? Every part of me wanted to say no, wanted to retreat from this conversation before it broke something I couldn't repair. But I'd spent 20 years running from questions, and I was so tired of running. "Yes," I whispered. "Tell me." The being placed his hand on my shoulder, and the touch was warm and steady and somehow conveyed more compassion than 100 human embraces. "Then let me show you what suffering actually means. Not what you think it means. What it means from a perspective that encompasses more than one life, one species, one narrow slice of time." The wall came alive again, but this time the images were more personal. I saw my own life, childhood, adolescence, seminary, Sarah, the highways. I saw moments of joy and moments of pain, decisions made and paths abandoned. And around it all, threading through it like invisible music, I saw the connections my choices had created, the ripples spreading outward in ways I'd never known. Suffering isn't punishment, Marcus, and it's not random. It's the inevitable consequence of a universe where choice is real, where actions have weight, where cause and effect can't be suspended just because the result is painful. The architect didn't design suffering. The architect designed freedom. Suffering is what freedom costs when it's exercised in systems where every choice affects every other choice. He showed me more natural disasters, diseases, accidents, and the intricate web of physical laws that made them possible, the same laws that made life possible, that made beauty possible, that made everything possible. You can't have a universe with stars and chemistry and evolution and consciousness without also having a universe with earthquakes and viruses and entropy and death. They're inseparable. The question isn't, why does God allow suffering? The question is, would you rather have a universe where nothing could suffer because nothing could choose, where nothing could die because nothing could live, where nothing could be lost because nothing could be loved? I thought about Sarah, about the pain of losing her, about whether I'd trade having known her to avoid that pain, and I knew the answer. "No," I said quietly. "No, I wouldn't. Neither would the architect. The universe was designed for experience, Marcus. All of it. The joy and the pain, the birth and the death, the connection and the loss. And yes, that means innocents suffer. That means prayers go unanswered. That means sometimes love isn't enough, and effort doesn't matter, and the bad thing happens anyway. But it also means that when you choose compassion despite having the freedom to choose cruelty, that choice means something. When you love despite knowing love ends in loss, that love is real. When you create meaning in a universe that doesn't provide it automatically, that meaning matters in ways it never could, in a universe where everything was predetermined, where suffering was impossible, where choice was illusion. He removed his hand from my shoulder and stepped back. "The corrupted ones want you to believe suffering proves absence, proves God doesn't exist or doesn't care, because if they can convince you of that, they can feed on your despair forever. But suffering doesn't prove absence, Marcus. Suffering proves presence. The presence of a universe where what you do matters, where your choices are real, where the love you give and the pain you endure and the meaning you make actually, genuinely, cosmically counts for something." I was crying again, but differently now. Not from fear or confusion, but from something breaking open in my chest that had been closed for 20 years. Then why don't more people know this? Why is faith so hard if the truth is so clear? He smiled, and it was sad, and knowing, and kind. Because if it was clear, it wouldn't be faith. It would be knowledge. And knowledge doesn't transform the way faith does. Faith, real faith, not certainty dressed up as faith, requires you to choose hope when the evidence is ambiguous, to choose love when hate would be easier, to choose meaning when meaninglessness would be more comfortable. That's the gift your species was given, Marcus. The gift of faith in a universe designed to make faith possible but never mandatory. And that gift is exactly what makes you worth watching, worth helping, worth dying for if it comes to that. The wall went still. The visions faded. We stood in that impossible space, the luminous being and the broken human, and I understood with sudden clarity that I'd just been given an answer to the question that had driven me from seminary 20 years ago. Not the answer I'd wanted, not the answer that made suffering stop hurting, but an answer that made suffering mean something. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. The being stepped back from the wall, and I watched as the surface returned to its neutral state, that liquid mercury stillness reflecting nothing but us. My mind was reeling, trying to hold everything I'd just learned, trying to reconcile 20 years of assumed emptiness with the vast, complex reality he'd just revealed. I felt exhausted and awake at the same time, like I'd been sleeping my entire life and had just opened my eyes to find the world larger and stranger and more meaningful than I'd ever imagined. "You'll need to leave soon," he said quietly, and there was something in his tone, regret, maybe, or the weight of duty. "Your body can only sustain this frequency for so long, and there are limits to what I'm permitted to show you, to tell you. The rest has to be your choice, your discovery." I looked at him, this being who'd just dismantled and rebuilt my entire understanding of existence in the span of what felt like minutes but might have been hours. "I still don't understand why me. Why not world leaders? Why not scientists or priests or people who could actually do something with this information?" He tilted his head, that almost human gesture I was starting to recognize as affection or amusement. "We've tried world leaders. They either don't believe, or they weaponize the information, or they suppress it because it threatens existing power structures. We've tried scientists. Most can't accept data that doesn't fit their paradigms. We've tried priests. Many are too invested in their specific interpretations to receive truth that challenges their certainty." He moved closer, and I found I was no longer afraid of his proximity. If anything, I wanted him closer, wanted to hold on to this moment before I had to return to the small, limited world I'd been living in. But people like you, Marcus, people who left because the answers weren't good enough, who kept asking even after the world taught them to stop, who chose uncertainty over false certainty, you're the ones who can actually hear what we're saying. You're the ones who might actually change because you're not trying to protect what you already believe. You're trying to find what's true. So what am I supposed to do with this? I gestured vaguely at everything, the craft, him, the knowledge now burning in my mind. Go back to my truck and drive to Phoenix and deliver strawberries like none of this happened? Tell people I met an alien who explained demons to me? They'll think I'm insane. "Some will," he agreed. "Most will, probably, but some won't. Some will hear something in your voice, see something in your eyes, recognize the resonance of truth, even if they can't explain why. Those are the ones who matter. Those are the ones who are also asking, also searching, also standing at the edge of everything they thought they knew." He walked toward the entrance, the doorway that had remained open this entire time, showing the highway and my truck and the pre-dawn darkness beyond. I followed, not wanting to leave, but knowing I had to, knowing this moment was ending whether I was ready or not. "Before I go," I said, my voice tight, "I need to ask one more question, the one I came in here planning to ask before everything else happened." He stopped and turned, waiting. "You said demons are real? That they're watchers who became corrupted, who feed on suffering. You said you're not one of them. But how do I know that's true? How do I know this whole thing isn't exactly the kind of deception I should have been afraid of? You could be lying. You could be one of them, showing me beautiful lies designed to lead me away from the truth." It was the question that had been lurking under everything else. The fear I'd been suppressing because I wanted so desperately for what he'd shown me to be real. But I had to ask. Had to voice the doubt that any rational person should have. He looked at me for a long moment, and those infinite eyes held something I could only describe as respect. You should ask that question, Marcus. You should always ask that question. Faith without discernment is just gullibility, and gullibility serves the corrupted ones as much as despair does. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I can't prove to you that I'm not deceiving you. I could perform miracles, show you wonders, give you experiences of transcendence, and none of it would constitute proof. The corrupted ones can do all of those things too. They can appear as angels of light, just like your scriptures warn. My stomach sank. Then how? There's only one way to know, he interrupted gently. Not to know with certainty, that's not available to you, not in this life, but to know with the kind of confidence that allows you to move forward, to choose, to act. You measure the fruit. You look at what the teaching produces in you, in others. Does it make you more loving or more judgmental, more open or more closed, more willing to serve or more eager to control, more able to forgive or more certain of who deserves punishment? He gestured around the craft, at the space we stood in. Everything I've told you tonight, does it make you want to condemn people or understand them? Does it make you feel superior to those who don't know what you now know? Or does it make you feel more connected to them, more aware of the struggle everyone faces? Does it make you want to weaponize this knowledge, use it to prove you're right and others are wrong? Or does it make you want to be kinder, more patient, more willing to sit with people in their suffering rather than explaining it away? I thought about everything he'd said, about suffering as the cost of freedom, about corrupted beings feeding on fear and division, about faith as a gift rather than a test, about my own journey from certainty to doubt to this strange new understanding that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. It makes me want to call Sarah, I said quietly. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I finally understand what she tried to tell me when I left, that not having all the answers doesn't mean there aren't any answers. That mystery isn't the same as meaninglessness. He smiled, and it was the warmest expression I'd seen from him, almost paternal. Then you have your answer about what I am. Judge the tree by its fruit, Marcus. Always. If what you've learned here tonight produces love, patience, kindness, humility, trust it. If it starts producing pride, judgment, division, certainty that separates you from others, question it. The corrupted ones can mimic truth, but they can't sustain love. Love always exposes them eventually. I nodded, feeling tears threatening again. Will I see you again? I don't know. That's not my decision alone. But whether you see me or not, we're watching. All of us who haven't fallen, who still serve the higher frequencies, who still believe your species is worth the risk of intervention, we're watching. And we're hoping your next 100 years will determine whether you transcend or extinct, whether you reach for the stars or pull them down on your own heads, whether you learn to feed on love or devour each other in fear. He placed his hand on my forehead, the same gesture I'd seen in religious art 1,000 times, blessing, anointing, benediction. His palm was warm, and I felt something pass between us, a transfer of what? Energy? Understanding? Permission? You won't remember everything I showed you, he said softly. The human mind can't hold all of it without damaging itself. But you'll remember enough. You'll remember what matters. And when you need to remember more, when you're ready for deeper understanding, it'll surface. Trust that. The doorway beckoned. Through it I could see the first hints of dawn touching the horizon, the darkness giving way to deep blue. My truck looked small and mundane and almost comforting in its ordinariness. A return to the world I knew, except I would never be able to see it the same way again. Thank you, I said, inadequate as the words were. For answering. For showing me. For... I gestured helplessly, unable to articulate what this night had meant, what it would continue to mean. "You're welcome, Marcus Webb. Go carefully, speak wisely, love broadly. And remember, faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's the choice to hope despite the doubt. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it real." I walked toward the doorway, and with each step, the craft's interior seemed to recede, to become less solid, like I was walking out of a dream into waking life. At the threshold, I turned back one more time. He was standing in the center of that impossible space, luminous and patient and impossibly old, watching me with those eyes that held oceans. "The corrupted ones," I said. "The demons. Are they winning?" His expression was unreadable. "Not yet, but it's closer than it should be. That's why we're here. That's why you're here. Go, Marcus, you have work to do." I stepped through the doorway onto the highway, and the temperature hit me immediately cold desert air, sharp and real and normal. I turned to look back at the craft, expecting it to dematerialize dramatically or shoot into the sky like in movies. Instead, it just faded. Slowly, gradually, like fog burning off in sunlight. The column of light dimmed and dispersed. The presence that had felt so massive just moments ago simply wasn't anymore. And I was standing alone on Interstate 40 in New Mexico as dawn broke over the mesas, looking at my truck 30 yards away like it was an artifact from another lifetime. I walked to it on legs that felt uncertain of the ground beneath them. The door opened normally. The interior smelled like coffee and pine air freshener and distance, exactly as it should. I climbed into the driver's seat and just sat there for a long moment, trying to reconcile the man who'd gotten out of this truck with the man who was now sitting in it. My phone was on the mount, showing 5047 a.m. I'd lost 3 hours. 3 hours that had felt like 30 minutes and also like 30 years. I touched the screen, and it came alive immediately. Full battery, functioning perfectly. The radio crackled to life when I turned the key, some morning show host, talking about traffic and weather like the world was normal, like nothing fundamental had shifted in the night. But something had shifted. Everything had shifted. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. Phoenix was still waiting. Strawberries and lettuce still needed to be delivered. The world continued its routine rotations, indifferent to private revelations. But I was different. I knew I was different in ways I was only beginning to understand. 15 miles down the road, as the sun climbed higher and the desert landscape became ordinary, again, beautiful but not impossible, vast but not infinite, I pulled over at a rest stop. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts I hadn't looked at in years. Sarah Webb. I'd never deleted her number. Never could quite bring myself to erase that last connection, even after the divorce was final, even after years of silence between us. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. It rang 4 times, and I was preparing to leave a voicemail when she answered, her voice sleepy and confused, and exactly as I remembered. "Marcus, is everything okay? It's 6 in the morning. Sarah." Her name caught in my throat. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I don't know if I'm crazy, but I need to tell you anyway. Are you in trouble? Are you hurt? No, I'm—" How did I explain this? How did I possibly put into words what had happened? "I finally understand. What you tried to tell me when I left. About faith. About mystery. About how not knowing everything doesn't mean nothing matters." Silence on the other end, but I could hear her breathing, could imagine her sitting up in bed, trying to make sense of this call from her ex-husband who'd walked away from everything 20 years ago. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "I can't explain it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm coming home, Sarah. I'm not asking for anything. I just need to see you, need to tell you I'm sorry, need to tell you that you were right and I was wrong and I finally finally understand why you could still believe when I couldn't. Another pause, longer this time. Then, where are you? New Mexico. I can be back in California in 3 days. After I make this delivery, would it be okay if I came by? Just to talk. Marcus. Her voice was soft now, almost tender. I've been waiting 20 years for this call. Come home. We'll talk. The phone call ended and I sat in the rest stop parking lot watching the sun climb higher, watching families and truckers and travelers move through their routines, all of them unaware that just a few miles back, the fabric of reality had torn open and shown me what lay beneath. I thought about what the being had said, about watchers and demons, about suffering and freedom, about faith as gift rather than test. I thought about how I was supposed to live with this knowledge, how I was supposed to go back to an ordinary life carrying extraordinary understanding. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the extraordinary was always supposed to be carried inside the ordinary. Maybe revelation wasn't meant to remove you from the world, but to help you see the world as it actually was, strange and beautiful and terrible and meaningful, all at once, all the time. I started the truck and pulled back onto the highway. Phoenix first, then home, then whatever came next. The radio was playing some pop song I didn't recognize, something about love and loss and trying again. I left it on. The music felt right somehow. Felt like proof that beauty still existed in simple things, that not everything had to carry cosmic weight to matter. But as I drove, as the miles accumulated beneath me like they had for 20 years, I kept looking up at the sky, at the stars that were still visible in the western darkness, even as the east brightened. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like grace, that I would never look at them the same way again. I asked an alien if he was a demon. He taught me that the real question isn't what they are. It's what we choose to become. Whether we feed on fear or transcend it. Whether we build walls or bridges. Whether we let suffering convince us nothing matters or let it teach us that everything does. And when I look at the stars now, I don't see silence anymore. I don't see absence. I see a question being asked across impossible distances, across dimensions I barely understand, across the gap between what we are and what we might become. I see an invitation we're only beginning to learn how to accept. And somewhere out there, I know, beings both luminous and corrupted are watching to see which answer we'll choose. Watching to see if we'll reach for transcendence or settle for extinction. Watching to see if faith, real faith, the kind that chooses hope in the face of ambiguity, will be enough to carry us through the darkness ahead. I don't know if it will be. I don't know if we'll make it. But for the first time in 20 years, I know the question matters. I know our choices are real. I know that suffering doesn't prove we're alone. It proves we're free. And I know that somewhere between the stars and the highway, between the cosmic and the ordinary, between what we've been and what we might become, there's a truth worth living for. Even if I never see him again, even if no one believes me, even if this becomes just another story, another testimony, another voice crying out in the digital wilderness, hoping someone else is asking the same questions, the stars are still there. The invitation is still open. And the choice, the eternal, terrible, beautiful choice, is still ours to make. That's what I learned in the desert that night. That's what I'm still learning every day since. And that's what I needed you to know, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. The light is real. The darkness is real. The struggle between them is real. And you're more important to that struggle than you could possibly imagine. Choose carefully. Choose lovingly. Choose with the understanding that every choice ripples outward in ways you'll never see, but that matter more than you know. That's not faith. That's just truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is stranger and more wonderful than any lie could ever be.